Madison was 29 years old, about to hit the big 3-0 in a few months. Living in New York City had its perks, but dating wasn't one of them. She swore every guy she met was either married to his job, emotionally unavailable, or just looking for a hookup. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thanks so much for watching. The last serious relationship she'd had was in college, and that felt like a lifetime ago. The dating scene in the city was brutal. Everyone was always rushing somewhere, glued to their phones, or too busy climbing the corporate ladder to invest in anything real. Madison worked in marketing for a mid-sized firm, and between the long hours and the exhausting commute, she barely had energy for herself, let alone dating. Her friends kept pushing her to try dating apps. "Madison, you're never going to meet anyone if you don't put yourself out there," her roommate Jessica would say, waving her phone around. "Look, I matched with this cute guy yesterday." Madison resisted for months. The whole idea felt so artificial, so desperate. But after another failed setup, through mutual friends, and a particularly lonely Saturday night, she finally caved. She downloaded the most popular app, figuring if she was going to do this, she might as well go with the one everyone uses. The sign-up process was tedious. Age, location, photos. She rushed through it, just wanting to get it over with. When it came to preferences, she barely glanced at the settings. She assumed it was all straightforward, looking for men, ages 25 to 35, within 20 miles. She skipped right past the orientation section, not realizing the default was set to everyone. Her first few days on the app were exactly what she expected. Disappointing. Guys with shirtless gym selfies, crude pickup lines, and conversations that fizzled out after 3 messages. She was ready to delete the whole thing when something unexpected happened. A profile appeared that made her pause. It was a woman, Natalie, 24, from Prague. The photo showed a girl with warm brown eyes, long hair, and a genuine smile that somehow reached through the screen. Madison stared at it, confused. Why was a woman showing up in her feed? She checked her settings and realized her mistake. The app was showing her both men and women. She should have fixed it immediately. But something about Natalie's profile kept her scrolling. The girl was studying art history, loved vintage bookshops, and had traveled to 12 countries before turning 24. Her photos weren't posed or filtered, just natural shots of her reading in cafes, standing in front of museums, laughing with friends. Before she could talk herself out of it, Madison swiped right. They matched immediately. Natalie messaged first. "Your profile says you work in marketing. Do you get to travel for work? I'm always curious about different careers." It was such a refreshing change from the usual, "Hey, beautiful" messages Madison received from men. They started talking about work, then travel, then books, then everything. Natalie was intelligent, funny, and had this way of asking questions that made Madison think about things differently. Their conversations stretched from hours to days to weeks. Madison found herself looking forward to Natalie's messages more than anything else in her day. She'd wake up to good morning texts from Prague, 6 hours ahead, and fall asleep to photos of Czech sunsets. "I've never talked to someone like this before," Natalie wrote one evening. "You make me want to share everything with you." Madison felt the same way, though she couldn't quite name what was happening between them. She'd never been attracted to women before. At least, she didn't think she had. But with Natalie, it felt different. It wasn't just the physical attraction, though she found herself staring at Natalie's photos longer than she should. It was the emotional connection, the way her heart raced when she saw Natalie's name on her phone. After 2 months of daily conversations, Natalie suggested a video call. Madison's hands shook as she accepted the invitation. When Natalie's face appeared on her screen, Smiling and real and even more beautiful than her photos, Madison felt something shift inside her chest. "Hi," Natalie said, her Czech accent making the simple words sound musical. "Hi," Madison managed back, suddenly aware of how fast her heart was beating. They talked for 3 hours that first call, then every few days after that. Madison started rearranging her schedule around their conversations, declining after-work drinks with colleagues so she could rush home to talk to Natalie. 3 months in, during one of their late-night calls, Natalie was quiet for a moment before speaking. "Madison, I need to tell you something." Madison's stomach dropped. "What is it?" "I think I'm falling for you." Natalie's voice was soft, vulnerable. "I know it's complicated because we're so far apart, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I had to say it." Madison stared at her screen, at this beautiful girl who had somehow become the most important part of her day. "I think I'm falling for you too," she whispered. Natalie's eyes closed briefly in relief. When she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "Madison, I keep thinking about what it would be like if you were here. I'm dying to finally kiss your lips, to know what you taste like." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I want to touch your face, trace your cheekbones with my fingers. I want to feel your skin, see if it's as soft as it looks on my screen." Madison's breath caught, her heart racing at the longing in Natalie's voice. "I think about that too," she admitted. "About what your hair would feel like in my hands, how you'd smell up close. Sometimes I close my eyes during our calls and pretend you're here with me," Natalie continued, her cheeks flushing pink. "I imagine what it would feel like to fall asleep next to you, to wake up and see your face first thing in the morning." The raw honesty in Natalie's words made Madison's chest ache with want. "Natalie!" "I know it sounds silly, but I've memorized every expression you make on these calls. The way you bite your lip when you're thinking, how your eyes light up when you laugh. I want to experience all of that in person, not just through a screen." The admission hung between them, heavy with possibility and complication. They were an ocean apart, living completely different lives. But the connection between them felt more real than anything Madison had experienced with the men she'd dated in New York. "What do we do now?" Madison asked. "I don't know," Natalie admitted. "But I don't want to stop talking to you." Neither did Madison. Over the next month, their relationship deepened. They shared everything: childhood memories, fears, dreams, the mundane details of their daily lives. Madison found herself planning her days around Prague time, calculating when Natalie would be free to talk. It was Natalie who suggested it first. "What if you came to visit?" The idea was crazy. Madison had never done anything so impulsive, but the thought of meeting Natalie in person, of finally closing the distance between them, made her pulse race with anticipation rather than fear. She booked the flight 3 days later. The 2 weeks leading up to her trip were a blur of nervous excitement. Madison told Jessica she was going to Prague for a solo vacation, unable to explain the real reason without trying to understand it herself first. She bought new clothes, learned basic Czech phrases, and counted down the days like a teenager. The flight to Prague felt endless. Madison's stomach churned with nerves and excitement. What if they didn't have the same connection in person? What if this was all some elaborate fantasy? What if she really wasn't attracted to women, and this was just some weird emotional anomaly? But when she saw Natalie standing in the arrivals area, holding a handwritten sign with Madison's name, all her doubts evaporated. Natalie was even more beautiful in person, smaller than Madison had imagined, with delicate features and eyes that lit up when she spotted Madison walking toward her. "Madison!" Natalie called out, dropping the sign and walking quickly toward her. They hugged, and Madison felt something click into place. Natalie was warm and real in her arms, smelling like vanilla and something distinctly her own. When they pulled apart, Their faces were close enough that Madison could count the flecks of gold in Natalie's brown eyes. "You're here," Natalie said, smiling so wide it made Madison's chest ache. "I'm here," Madison confirmed, suddenly understanding that this trip was going to change everything. Natalie had planned a perfect itinerary for Madison's week in Prague. They visited the castle, walked across the Charles Bridge at sunset, got lost in the winding streets of the Old Town. But Madison barely registered the tourist attractions. She was too busy watching Natalie, the way she gestured when she got excited about art history, how she insisted on paying for coffee everywhere they went, the comfortable silences that fell between them as they walked side by side. On the third night, they were sitting by the river, sharing a bottle of wine Natalie had brought in her backpack. The castle was lit up across the water, and tourists chatted quietly around them. But Madison only had eyes for Natalie. "I can't believe you're actually here," Natalie said, leaning back on her hands. "For months you were just a voice and a face on my phone. And now what?" Madison asked, moving closer on the blanket they'd spread on the grass. "Now I don't know how I'm going to let you leave." The honesty in Natalie's voice made Madison's breath catch. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind Natalie's ear. Natalie leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering closed. "Natalie," Madison whispered. When Natalie opened her eyes, they were full of the same longing Madison felt. This time, when they leaned toward each other, there was no hesitation. The kiss was soft at first, tentative. Madison had never kissed a woman before, but it felt natural, right? Natalie's lips were softer than any she'd ever kissed, and when Natalie's hand came up to cup her cheek, Madison felt herself melting into the touch. They broke apart slowly, foreheads touching. "Was that okay?" Natalie asked quietly. Madison's answer was to kiss her again, deeper this time. She felt something awakening inside her, a part of herself she'd never known existed. This wasn't just about Natalie, though Natalie was wonderful. It was about discovering something fundamental about who she was. They walked back to Natalie's apartment hand in hand, both quiet with anticipation. Natalie lived in a tiny studio near the university, filled with art books and plants and fairy lights strung across the ceiling. It was exactly what Madison had imagined. "Are you sure about this?" Natalie asked, as they stood in the middle of her small space. Madison looked at this beautiful girl who had turned her world upside down without even trying. "I've never been more sure of anything." What happened next was tender and exploratory. They moved slowly, learning each other, discovering what it meant to be intimate with someone whose body was similar to their own. Madison had been nervous about the physical aspect, but with Natalie, everything felt natural. They were gentle and patient with each other, communicating with touches and whispered questions. When Natalie's fingers traced along Madison's skin, when their bodies pressed together, when Natalie's breath caught in her throat, Madison understood something profound about herself. This wasn't just an exception or an experiment. This was part of who she was. Afterward, they lay tangled together on Natalie's narrow bed, talking quietly as Prague settled into night around them. "How do you feel?" Natalie asked, her fingers tracing patterns on Madison's shoulder. Madison considered the question. "Different," she said honestly. "Like I understand myself better now." "Good, different?" Madison turned to face her. "The best different." They spent the rest of Madison's week exploring both Prague and each other. They made love with increasing confidence and passion. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. They walked through the city like they were the only two people in the world. But as Madison's departure date approached, reality started creeping in. She had a life in New York, a job, an apartment, friends. Natalie had her studies, her life in Prague. They'd avoided talking about the future, but now it loomed between them like a wall. "I don't want you to go," Natalie said on their last night together. They were back by the river in the same spot where they'd first kissed. I don't want to go either, Madison admitted. But I have to. You could stay, Natalie said quietly. People do it. Move countries for love. Madison felt her heart breaking a little. She loved Natalie. She was sure of that now. But love didn't erase the practical realities of their situation. She had a career she'd worked years to build, a life she wasn't ready to abandon, even for this incredible connection. I can't, she said, hating how the words sounded. Not right now. Maybe someday, but… Natalie nodded, though Madison could see the hurt in her eyes. I understand. But Madison wasn't sure she understood it herself. All she knew was that she wasn't ready to uproot her entire life, even for someone as amazing as Natalie. The goodbye at the airport was devastating. They held each other until the last possible moment, making promises to stay in touch, to visit again, to figure something out. But they both knew it wouldn't be the same. The flight back to New York felt completely different from the flight there. Madison stared out the window, processing everything that had happened. She was returning home fundamentally changed. She now knew she was bisexual. That wasn't even a question anymore. She'd experienced something beautiful and real with Natalie, and she'd learned that attraction and love could surprise you in the most unexpected ways. But she was also returning alone, leaving behind someone who had become incredibly important to her in just 1 week. As her plane descended into JFK, Madison felt a mix of sadness and anticipation. She was different now, and that meant her future was going to be different too. At baggage claim, she stood waiting for her suitcase to appear on the carousel, lost in thought about what came next. She'd have to navigate dating as someone who now knew she was attracted to both men and women. She'd have to figure out how to maintain her connection with Natalie from thousands of miles away. She'd have to understand what this discovery about herself meant for her future. Excuse me, a voice said beside her. Is that carousel number 3? Madison looked up to see a woman about her age, with short auburn hair and green eyes, consulting her baggage claim ticket with a confused expression. Yeah, that's 3, Madison confirmed, pointing to the sign. Thank God, I thought I was going to be standing at the wrong one for an hour. The woman smiled, extending her hand. I'm Riley. Madison, she replied, shaking Riley's hand and noticing how warm it was. Flying back from somewhere fun? Riley asked as they both watched the conveyor belt start moving. Prague, actually. You? London. Work trip that turned into a bit of a vacation. Riley's smile was easy, genuine. Prague sounds amazing. Was it your first time there? It was, Madison said, surprised by how natural the conversation felt after the emotional exhaustion of the past few days. It exceeded all my expectations. As they talked, waiting for their luggage, Madison found herself really looking at Riley. She was beautiful in a completely different way than Natalie. More angular features, confident posture, laugh lines around her eyes that suggested someone who smiled often. This might be forward, Riley said as they both grabbed their suitcases. But would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime? I mean, if you're not seeing anyone or… Madison paused, thinking about Natalie, about the week they'd just shared, about the impossible distance between New York and Prague. Then she looked at Riley, who was waiting patiently for an answer, and she thought about the person she'd discovered herself to be. I'd like that, Madison said, meaning it. I really would. As they exchanged numbers, Madison realized this was just the beginning. Prague had shown her who she really was. Now she had to figure out what to do with that knowledge. Standing in the arrivals terminal at JFK, exchanging numbers with a woman she'd just met, Madison felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine excitement about what came next. She didn't know where things would lead with Riley, or how her long-distance situation with Natalie would resolve, or what dating as a newly understood bisexual woman in New York would be like. But for the first time in a long time, the uncertainty felt like possibility rather than anxiety. And that, Madison thought, as she and Riley walked toward the taxi stand together, was exactly where she wanted to be.